me as I tried to capture real paranormal activity on camera right before our eyes. Let's see if we can summon some ghosts. There's something about the paranormal that fascinates us, isn't there? The idea that there's something out there that we can't explain. Something that defies the laws of physics and reason. It's a topic that sparks our imagination and makes us wonder if we're truly alone in this universe. But despite the intrigue, the concept of paranormal activity is often met with skepticism. Many experts argue that these events can be explained by science, that there's always a logical reason behind them. And you know what? They're right. Most of the time, that is. However, there are those rare instances where we can't find a rational explanation. The evidence is just too compelling to ignore. The problem is, capturing genuine paranormal evidence is extremely difficult. It requires a combination of luck, timing, and being in the right place at the right time. Even then, it's easy to debunk or explain away what we've captured. That's why so many paranormal investigators have dedicated their lives to studying these events, to finding that one piece of evidence that challenges our understanding of reality. However, those instances where we've been lucky enough to capture something truly inexplicable, footage that leaves even the most hardened skeptics scratching their heads, wondering how it's possible. And today, we're going to take a look at some of that footage, from strange noises in abandoned asylums to ghostly apparitions in haunted mansions. We're going to delve into the world of the paranormal and see if we can uncover some answers. Let's start with this clip from an abandoned asylum in the middle of nowhere. The team who captured this footage were investigating reports of strange noises and unexplained movements. As you can see, they set up cameras throughout the building hoping to catch something. And then, this happens. That's right, folks, that's a door slamming shut on its own. There's no explanation for it, no draft, no animals, just an unexplained event. Next clip comes from a haunted mansion in the south of England. The owners of the mansion reported seeing ghostly apparitions and hearing strange whispers. The team set up cameras throughout the mansion hoping to capture some evidence. And then, this happened. Can you see that? It's a figure, a shadowy figure that seems to be moving of its own accord. The owners of the mansion reported seeing the same figure multiple times, and there's no explanation for it. We also have a clip from a group of friends who decided to investigate a haunted cave system. They set up cameras throughout the cave hoping to capture some evidence of paranormal activity. And then, this happened. That's right, folks, that's an unexplained light moving through the cave. There's no explanation for it, no logical reason why it's happening. But the most compelling footage we have comes from a team of investigators who decided to investigate a haunted hotel room. The room has a history of paranormal activity, the guests reporting all sorts of strange occurrences. The team set up cameras throughout the room hoping to capture some evidence. And then, this happened. Can you see that? It's a figure, a ghostly figure that seems to be standing right in front of the camera. The team who captured this footage were left shaken, and there's no explanation for what we're seeing. This footage is incredible, isn't it? It's the kind of evidence that challenges our understanding of reality, that makes us question what we think we know about the world. And that's what makes it so compelling. Left wondering if there's more to life than what we can see and touch. If there's something out there that's beyond our understanding. So, what do you think? Do you believe in the paranormal? Do you think we've captured something truly inexplicable? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to check out our other video on the most haunted places on Earth. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video. Part 1, the asylum footage. You know how these ghost hunter shows always feature a few big hits. The incredible footage that somehow always ends with a skeptical but inconclusive nod. That's what I thought I'd be watching tonight. Never signed up for this whole paranormal thing. My brother Charlie, on the other hand, had been fascinated with it all his life. When he got his dream gig as a production assistant on Haunted Discoveries, I promised him I'd watch every episode. Bro, you have to see what we got last night, Charlie said, voice practically trembling over the phone. What? Did a door swing shut in the middle of an abandoned building? No, man, he whispered, his excitement dimming slightly. This is different. We were at the old Heartwood Asylum, and look, just come over and see the footage. When I got to Charlie's, his small apartment was dark, and the hum of the TV seemed louder than usual. I barely had time to put my jacket down before he hit play. I wasn't expecting much. In fact, I was ready to crack a joke, but I never got the chance. The footage was already rolling when I sat down. Heartwood Asylum was an infamous location, abandoned in the 1970s after a series of incidents that no one ever seemed able to explain. There were rumors about the patients being subjected to horrific treatments, left to rot in cells that hadn't seen sunlight in years. But the asylum itself, there was something about that place. A silent malevolence seeped from its walls. In the footage, the team was moving down a long corridor. They'd set up static cameras in various rooms, hoping to catch something. A flicker here, a shadow there, that was typical. But then, as they approached room 107, a door slammed shut. The entire team froze, including Charlie, who was on camera, holding his mic like it was the only thing grounding him to reality. "Did you hear that?" a muffled voice said somewhere behind the camera. They cautiously walked forward, and that's when I saw the door to room 107 was ajar, swinging slightly as though something had just pushed it. The eerie silence was broken only by the slow, rhythmic creak of that old, rusted door. "Dude, what am I looking at?" I whispered, feeling a sudden chill. "Wait, just watch," Charlie replied, eyes locked on the screen. One of the investigators, a guy named Harris, stepped toward the door. He put his hand out to push it open, and that's when we saw something. Just inside the doorway, there was a flash of pale figure with hollow eyes staring out. I thought it was a trick of the light, but it moved. It stepped back, retreating into the darkness as though it were leading them in. "No way," I breathed. The team entered the room slowly, and the camera shook as the cameraman adjusted, trying to capture the scene. But that figure was gone, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The room was empty except for old, crumbling furniture and peeling wallpaper. Then came the worst part. There was a whisper, low and chilling, but unmistakable. A single word, "Stay." Part 2, the mansion in England. Charlie was quiet as the asylum footage ended. His fingers clenched around the remote. "Wasn't even the freakiest part, man," he said, almost like he was convincing himself. The next location was the old Henshaw mansion out in southern England. It's known for some crazy history, strange disappearances, ghostly sightings, all that. I knew the Henshaw mansion by reputation. People whispered about how the house itself was cursed, how anyone who tried to live there ended up either dead or missing. I always thought it was exaggerated, a horror story meant to keep people away from the decrepit place. But as Charlie hit play again, I could tell this was no ordinary haunted house episode. The footage opened with the camera panning over the mansion's main hall. Heavy, dark curtains covered the windows, blocking out any light. The air seemed thick, almost tangible, as if decades of secrets weighed it down. Cameraman's footsteps echoed, giving a sense of how vast and empty the place was. I could almost feel the temperature drop through the screen. "Can you feel that?" One of the investigators whispered, her breath misting in the cold air. "It's like it's watching us," another voice replied. The team set up their equipment, placing cameras along the corridors and rooms where the most activity had been reported. They'd heard stories from the owners about a ghostly figure, pale, shadowed, barely more than an outline. It had been seen gliding across rooms, lingering by doorways, and sometimes whispering in a voice that no one could quite understand. After the cameras were in place, the team gathered in the sitting room, reviewing the initial footage. That's when one of the static cameras they had left in the upper hallway picked up something. In the background, by the end of the hallway, was that same pale figure, barely visible at first. It seemed to hover, watching them from afar. Then, without warning, it darted across the screen. Charlie leaned forward, rewinding the footage and playing it back in slow motion. I could see the figure a bit more clearly now. Its face was a blur, like it was in constant motion, or maybe like it didn't have a face at all. "See that?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, feeling my heart beat faster. But the figure wasn't done. As the team continued reviewing the footage, the camera captured it creeping closer and closer, lurking just outside their circle of flashlights. And then it stopped just behind one of the investigators. "Don't move," the lead investigator murmured, sensing the figure's presence. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the fear underneath. Slowly, she turned to face the thing. For a second, the camera caught it clearly, a figure with empty, black sockets where its eyes should have been. Its mouth twisted in a grimace that stretched far too wide. and then, in an instant, it lunged forward. The camera went dark. I jolted, my pulse pounding. But Charlie just sat there, staring at the screen like he was trying to make sense of what he'd seen. They never went back for that camera, he finally said, eyes wide. No one has, and no one knows where that figure came from or where it went. Part 3, The Cave of Lights. After the mansion footage, I couldn't imagine anything stranger. But Charlie seemed almost hesitant to press play on the next clip. This one, I don't know, man, he muttered. It's just not normal. What, as if the last one was? I replied, half joking. But Charlie didn't laugh. He simply hit play. The scene shifted to a remote cave system. A group of our friends had ventured into these caves on a dare. They'd heard stories of strange lights and inexplicable shadows that flickered in the darkness. So they'd come prepared, or so they thought. Their headlamps bobbed up and down in the darkness as they set up their equipment, talking in hushed voices. The walls of the cave seemed to close in around them, casting strange, unnatural shadows that twisted and stretched with every movement. The leader of the group, the guy named James, spoke directly into his camera. We're about 3 miles in. If anything's going to happen, it'll be in the next stretch. This is where the lights were last reported. They pressed onward, their footsteps echoing ominously as they went deeper. And then, without warning, the first light appeared. It was faint, a tiny glimmer in the distance, like a lone firefly hovering in the pitch-black tunnel. One of the girls, Anna, pointed it out, and they all turned toward it, squinting in disbelief. Is that? Dane trailed off, his voice tinged with awe and a hint of fear. The light flickered, shifting colors from a pale blue to an unnatural, sickly green. It floated down the narrow passage, almost like it was leading them. Without thinking, they followed it, drawn deeper and deeper into the cave, the light dancing just out of reach. They whispered excitedly, laughing nervously as though they were caught in a dream. But the laughter faded as the light began to pulse, its glow intensifying with each flicker, filling the cave with a cold, electric energy. It was almost hypnotic. Anna reached out a hand as if to touch it, and as soon as her fingers brushed the light, cave walls trembled and the ground beneath them shook. The light vanished, plunging them into total darkness. What the hell was that? Someone shouted, their voice panicked and echoing off the walls. They fumbled with their headlamps, the beams trembling as they flicked them on and off. But the lights wouldn't stay on for more than a few seconds before flickering out again. The only sound was their ragged breathing echoing off the walls, amplifying their fear. Then, out of nowhere, the light returned. But this time, it wasn't alone. Dozens of lights filled the tunnel, each one pulsing with that same sickly glow. They moved in synchronized, jerking patterns like a swarm of insects. And then they began to close in. Run! Dane screamed, and the camera shook violently as they sprinted back the way they'd come. The lights pursued them, weaving through the air like they were alive, darting ahead of the group, cutting off their escape. One by one, the lights surrounded each member of the group, hovering inches from their faces, bathing them in that cold, otherworldly glow. The last clear shot from the camera was of Hannah's face, eyes wide and mouth open in a silent scream, her skin pale and almost translucent in the light. Then the footage cut to black. I sat there, stunned, feeling a creeping unease settle over me. Did they make it out? Charlie's face was pale as he looked at me. No one knows. They found the camera outside the cave entrance, but not them. Part 4, The Haunted Hotel Room. The room felt heavier as we moved on to the next clip. Charlie seemed reluctant to play it, almost as if he didn't want to relive what he'd seen. This one's the worst, he muttered, finally pressing play. The footage was from a hotel notorious for its paranormal activity. Room 616. To be precise, a room with a chilling history of unexplained deaths and disappearances dating back decades. Guests reported shadowy figures, strange noises, and an overpowering sense of dread. Some even claimed they felt as though they were being watched every second they stayed there. This time, the team had set up cameras throughout the room, determined to capture the activity that countless guests had described. Camera panned across the space, nothing unusual, just a standard if slightly outdated hotel room. A king-size bed, floral pattern wallpaper, a dusty old wardrobe, and a single, heavy armchair near the window. All right, the investigator said, his voice low and cautious. We'll do a quick EVP session here and see if we pick anything up. They sat in a circle around the coffee table, holding recording devices, and began asking questions. For the first few minutes, there was nothing. Just the low hum of the room's air conditioner and the faint sound of traffic from the street below. But then the temperature dropped. Visible chill hung in the air and the windows fogged up, despite it being the middle of summer. One of the investigators, Sarah, shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. "That's not normal," she whispered. And that's when the whispers began. At first, they were barely audible, like faint murmurs in the distance. But as the team continued asking questions, the voices grew louder, until they were clear enough to make out individual words. "Leave," they whispered over and over like a chant. "Did you hear that?" one of them asked, his voice trembling. They all nodded, glancing around the room. The air felt oppressive, heavy with an unseen presence. And then, without warning, the wardrobe door creaked open. Camera caught it, all the doors swinging wide, revealing nothing but darkness inside. One of the team members, a guy named Ben, hesitated, then took a step toward it, peering into the darkness. "There's something in there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He reached into the wardrobe, his hand disappearing into the shadows. For a moment, he looked back at the team as if to reassure them, but then his expression changed. His face twisted in pain, his mouth opening in a silent scream, as though something had latched onto him. "Ben!" Sarah cried, rushing forward to pull him out. But just as she grabbed him, the camera feed cut to static, filling the screen with a harsh, crackling noise. When the video resumed, the room was empty. The bed was made, the lights were off, and there was no sign of Ben or the rest of the team. Camera had been left running, pointed at the wardrobe, which now stood ajar, shadows pulling inside. For nearly 2 minutes, the camera remained still, capturing nothing but the eerie silence of the empty room. Then, just as abruptly as before, the wardrobe door slammed shut, and the video ended. I stared at the screen, feeling my pulse race. "What happened to them?" Charlie shook his head, his eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen in him before. "They never came back." The hotel staff found the camera the next morning, still rolling. No one's seen the team since. The room seemed to close in around us, an oppressive silence filling the space. For the first time, I felt genuinely afraid not just of what I'd seen, but of what might still be watching us unseen from the shadows. Part 5, the final clip. I didn't think anything could rattle me more than the last clip, but Charlie saved the most disturbing footage for last. His face was pale, hands trembling slightly as he queued it up. "I almost didn't want to show you this," he muttered. "It was too much, even for us." The screen flickered to life, revealing a small, dimly lit room in another hotel, this one in a sleepy little town that no one ever paid much attention to. It was room 309, notorious among locals for being bad luck. Staff avoided it whenever possible, saying they heard things at night, shuffling sounds, whispers, and on more than one occasion crying. But this footage was different. This wasn't just eerie, it was wrong. The footage started with a man named Greg, a seasoned investigator who had spent over a decade looking into haunted locations. He was alone in the room, his face illuminated by the soft glow of his flashlight. He walked slowly, panning his camera around the room, narrating as he went. The room was Spartan, a bed, a wooden chair, and a single lamp that cast long, eerie shadows. It's just me in here tonight," he said, his voice steady but tense. "We've got reports of people hearing their own voices, seeing themselves in the mirror when they're not standing near it, and well, I guess I'm here to see if it's true." He set up his camera on a tripod in the corner and sat down on the bed. For a while, nothing happened. Greg asked a few standard questions, recording for EVP responses, and then he stopped, as though listening. Did you hear that?" he whispered. He looked around, but the room was silent. Then the temperature dropped visibly. A thin layer of frost began to form on the walls, and Greg's breath fogged in front of him, hanging in the air like smoke. "Who's here with me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The air was still, thick with tension, and then, out of nowhere, a soft voice answered. It was barely audible, but there was no mistaking it. "You." Greg froze, his eyes wide. I could see his hand trembling as he held the microphone closer. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. The silence stretched out, oppressive and heavy, and then, slowly, the mirror across from him began to fog up. A handprint appeared on the glass, as though someone were pressing their palm against it from the other side. Greg stared, visibly terrified but unable to look away as the handprint smeared down the mirror, leaving a faint trail. And then something else began to emerge. Letters scrawled in the fog, forming one slow, deliberate word, leave. Greg gulped, muttering under his breath, maybe I should. He reached out, hesitating before finally standing up to grab his camera. But as he approached the tripod, the door slammed shut. Greg whipped around, his flashlight beam shaking as he tried the handle. It wouldn't budge. Come on, this isn't funny, he said, his voice cracking. And then, on the opposite side of the room, a faint shadow began to take shape. It was small at first, just a smudge in the darkness, but it grew, stretching taller and taller, until it was as tall as the ceiling. It was a human form, no, not quite human. Its limbs were too long, its fingers ending in sharp, shadowy points. Greg backed away, pressing himself against the door, his face pale. The shadow figure slowly extended one arm, pointing a single, elongated finger toward him. And then, as though dragged by some invisible force, Greg's body jerked forward, closer to the figure. Please, he whispered, terror etched across his face. Let me go. The figure's head tilted, and in a low, guttural voice, it responded, stay. Greg's scream echoed through the room, piercing, raw. But the figure didn't move. It simply stood there, watching him until the camera went dark. When the video returned, the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the door slightly ajar, and the mirror was spotless, no handprints, no smudges, just an empty room. Did anyone find him? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Charlie shook his head, his face blank with horror. No. Camera was found in the hallway outside the room. Greg's never been seen since. We sat in silence, the weight of the last clip settling over us like a shroud. I felt cold, my mind racing with images of that shadow figure, of Greg's desperate scream. But more than anything, I felt like something had changed. Like that darkness from the screen had somehow slipped into the room with us, waiting, watching. As I glanced at the shadowy corners, I could have sworn I saw something just out of reach.